Okay, so you really know rent overcharge. I mean, of course, I've known you for many years. For all the time I've known you, you've always done rent overcharge, among other things, right?
We've known each other for 20 years, Steve.
So, at least that long.
I've litigated rent overcharge cases at DHCR, at Supreme Court, at the Appellate Division, and still do it.
In the 1990s, well, at least starting in the 1990s, that was really kind of like the dark ages for tenants who were trying to do rent overcharge, isn't it?
Oh, it was absolute hell.
Now, what made it so tough?
A tenant would file an overcharge complaint, and that complaint would take 3 to 4 to 5 years for its initial determination. So, unless the tenant had a lawyer who could bring a proceeding in court to compel DHCR to make a decision, that thing would sit there and just languish, forgotten.
DHCR, which adjudicates these rent overcharge complaints, is one of the largest agencies in New York State. Why was it taking them so long?
Probably A, they would only assign a certain amount of staff to the overcharge complaints. B, just administrative inertia. And C, there was probably some conscious decision somewhere within DHCR not to push these along. Because it just wasn't happening. So, in 1997, the legislature enacted, totally on the sly, nobody saw this coming, the Rent Regulation Reform Act. And what the Rent Regulation Reform Act does is it allows certain apartments to be deregulated once the rents reach a certain level, and also cut off rent overcharges at a 4-year statute of limitations. Now that was okay because there's always been a statute of limitations on rent overcharges. And
there's a statute of limitations for everything, right? There's the law says, you know, it's 1 year for assault, and 2 years for this, and 6 years for that, right? And so it's just 4 years for a rent overcharge, but they made it tougher.
Well, a statute of limitations is an arbitrary number that the legislature picks. The statute of limitations for one case might be 4 years. Statute of limitations for another case might be 3. Why? Who knows? So the actual amount of years is not unfair in and of itself. What was fundamentally unfair is they put in the statute that a court or the agency could only look back at the rent history for 4 years, or it could not determine the overcharge.
So is the issue that you can only get 4 years of rent overcharge, the last 4 years of rent overcharge, or is it the issue like that you can only look back 4 years?
The issue was you could only look back for 4 years.
So if you were rent overcharged, let's say, more than 4 years ago, and that the illegal jump in rent was more than 4 years ago, could you recover anything?
No.
So let's compare this to other statutes of limitations. Like, take for instance, if you committed an assault, and the statute of limitations on assault is 1 year, but every week this guy beats the hell out of you. So obviously, you can recover for the last 1 year of assault. But if you use the same analysis that's in the rent overcharge, that means that if he started beating you more than a year ago, he could still beat you. He could continue to beat you, and that's legal.
That's exactly correct. Let's compare it to a murder. If I shot you, suppose the statute of limitations for murder was 4 years. I shot you 5 years ago. You linger in a coma for 5 years. You die tomorrow. If you apply the same logic, I could not be accused of your murder.
That is something else. And so essentially it's saying you have license to commit rent overcharge, as long as you're not caught for 4 years. Is that correct?
A lot of people move into an apartment that they're told is deregulated, that should not have been deregulated, so then they'll never guess that they're being overcharged, and it should be a rent-stabilized apartment.
How about this? I mean, you could just advertise your apartments in Wisconsin, and like some Wisconsin person goes in, doesn't know about rent. Maybe it'll take him 4 years to figure it out.
You don't have to advertise in Wisconsin because there are plenty of suckers in New York.
So the courts have realized this, and what happened?
So the courts see this happening and are very frustrated because the rule ties the hand of a court to find facts. You tell the court, oh, you can't look at something that goes back. And what the courts have done, and it started back in 2005, I believe, in a case called the Thornton case, was start cutting exceptions out to this rule and saying when there are cases of fraud, the court can look back more than 4 years to reveal the source of that fraud and then apply that analysis going forward to the present and find an overcharge. Now, you can still only find an overcharge for the past 4 years. You can't find an overcharge 5 years ago. But you can look at something that may have happened 5, 10, or more years ago that was the origination of the overcharge.
They're becoming very clear that if there's fraud involved, you can look back more than 4 years. But what is fraud?
Fraud is misrepresentation. It is knowingly trying to hide something.
But the rent overcharge is fraud. I mean, rent overcharge is always fraud.
Not necessarily. Rent overcharge can arise from a miscalculation. It can arise from an honest, erroneous analysis of prior rents. It can arise because the regulations are convoluted and the landlord may think they're entitled to certain increases when they're not. There are instances where it's not fraudulent.
What are the implications of the court's recent decisions relating to this 4-year rule?
The rule, as it was interpreted for the past 13 years, really made it close to impossible for most tenants to prevail in their overcharge claims.
Mm-hmm.
I think the courts realized that the rule was a source of abuse and that the legislature really didn't mean for that statute to allow people to get away with fraud. Rent overcharge is important to the system because too many people buy into New York real estate for speculative reasons, and there's too much incentive to cheat. Allowing tenants to pursue cases for rent overcharge keeps the system honest, and it allows people to strike back at predatory landlords.